and hard into the shadows, where the women of Greek myth reside, before moving closer to them and asking if they were always in the shape that we know them now. She then beautifully tracks their journey from then to now, looking at their representation in their many retellings, including translations in theatre, art, film, TV, music video, and even memes. It's ace. There are 9 myths tracked in her book, and we'll be talking about a couple of them today. What's that? You want to know if you can get the book? Well, yes, you can. You can buy the book tonight anytime and even get it signed by Natalie at the end. So tonight's going to work a little bit like this. First, in a minute, we're going to be hearing from the amazing Professor Edith Hall. After Edith, I'll be asking Natalie a few questions before we open up to all of your questions. If you can put your question in the box, either on Zoom, on Zerucci, I'll put it to Natalie for you. Or if you're on if you're on the front row, you can put it to you herself with the help of my incredible producer, Dickon. Then Natalie's editor, George, will be on screen to officially launch the book. So I hope you'll have something to toast with then. This salon will come to an end about 10 minutes till 9, unless you've got your copy of your book, in which case Natalie will be signing it for you live if you would like that. But as this is Natalie's launch, we're first going to hear from the spectacular human and classicist that is Professor Edith Hall. Take it away, Edith.
Thank you so much. I'm so thrilled to be here. I'm so excited that Nat has given us yet another great gift from her remarkable talent. So Nat truly is Renaissance woman. First, she made us laugh with her amazing stand-up comedy, and she still is. She keeps that one going. Then she wrote a detective novel, The Amber Fury, which I found absolutely enchanting and disturbing, and actually taught me a very great deal about what it's like to be deaf. And I thought that that was quite brilliant, because a lecturer's inarticulate rage, the way this is grafted into the modern novel. But my favourite of all of Nat's books still is Jocasta's Children, The Children of Jocasta, because I was on the knife edge till the very last page. How was she going to get his meaning out of this? How was she going to do it? And when it turned out to be a girl guide hike in the hills of Cathaeron, brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And then with the amazing Thousand Ships, she made us all cry and cry and cry. And I was so proud that we managed to get to Cyprus, where all these Greek actresses brought Homer home through Nat to one of the most patriarchal islands in the remaining rest of the Aegean. And that happened last October. And it was probably one of the very, very, very top 3 nights of my life, when all these actresses and Nat and I marauded the streets of Nicosia, very, very drunk, just women, not frightened of anything, not frightened of the dark, not frightened of men, led by Natalie. And we ended up singing Flower of Scotland with female football fans from Scotland who'd just been out to fight the... we played bouzouki music to Flower of Scotland. That's the kind of friend she is. The one about this book, though, is that Nat is showing off her intellectual chops. It is incredible. The footnotes are incredible. She has got a capacity for finding in the variants of ancient myths in the most obscure places, like the Scolia, Pseudo-Apollodorus, all this kind of place. She finds these variant versions, which shows that these myths, which are so astoundingly patriarchal in their main drifts, have always been contested. And she has this ear for pulling out these details, a bit like a detective novel, and then thumping it back to you and saying, well, what have these myths got to say to today? And the answer is, well, go and read, go and watch Orange is the New Black or Buffy the Vampire Slayer. The only time I get lost is with Nat on popular culture. I really do. I mean, I do not know how she managed to read all that classics and do all that popular culture. This book is going to be compulsory reading, not only for the general public, but for people doing film studies, TV studies, I'm sure all kinds of electronic game studies, theatre studies. There's a lot of wonderfully sensitive comments about fine art in it, especially, just the Rossetti in the opening chapter. So it's going to be like compulsory on every classical reception course that there is, as well as many others. And as usual with Nat, it's just a devastatingly good read. So Natalie Haynes also just last week showed me what an unbelievable friend she is. She always fights for the women's cause. She's utterly reliable and faithful as a friend, an intellectual and a writer. I've read the 2 lines today in Lysistrata, completely came across them by accident, and I realised she is our Lysistrata. When Lysistrata is about to go and beat up the horrible magistrate, the women's chorus say to her, "You bravest of all mothers, and most nettly, stinging nettly of all grandmothers, advance in rage and never soften. You have got our wind behind you." And you so do, Natalie. I really love you. I love your book. Well done. Here's my drink. Yeah. It's a lovely book. Oh, have another drink.
Oh yeah, no, that's right. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Edith. Renaissance woman, Nat.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, I love Edith.
I love Edith too. And after her brilliant introduction, I now have to answer a kind of entry-level question.
Okay.
About us now. And I wanted to ask you, because we hear so many of these stories as children,
Yes.
for the first time in our retellings,
Yes.
and they're designed to be for us as children, are we almost the victims of oversimplification when
Yes.
it comes to women?
Yeah, we really are. And a problem is that the kind of most popular children's editions have tended to be the Roger Lancelyn Green Puffin Greek Myths, which is the one I had as a child, or the Nathaniel Hawthorne Tanglewood Tales. And Lancelyn Green is 20th century, Hawthorne is 19th century, and so they tend to reflect their own prejudices of their times, and that's fair enough. Nobody can be outside of time. We might have higher expectations for people we perceive as great artists. We expect more from Homer, do we? But of course it's not fair to expect people to be able to see into the future and see values that they don't have. But it's a shame, because the simplification of stories that we get in these children's versions, the first versions that we come across, the ones that we end up thinking one way or another must be true or right, and from which other versions deviate, they have tended to minimize women. They have tended to overlook the men who behave badly. So we tend to think of, for example, Theseus as this tremendous adventurer who goes and slays a minotaur. We don't think about him as a serial killer of women, which he is, and a serial abductor of women, which he is, and certainly a one-off abductor of a child, of Helen, before she is old enough to become Helen of Troy. He abducts her aged either 7 or 10. So he's really grim. And it's okay if you don't want to put those kind of stories in children's books, I get it. But it means that we tend to grow up believing that men are always the heroes in these stories and women aren't. And I know I've said this 10,000 times, but it doesn't make it less true. When Euripides takes on the Trojan War stories, and we have 8 of his tragedies which retell bits of the Trojan War, 7 of those plays which survive to us today, of the 8 that there are, have women as the title characters. So for Euripides, the most important, most dramatic elements of the war are bits that have women in right at the core. And it's just not reasonable to say, oh, these stories have always been male-focused. No, they haven't. That's simply not the case. So, yeah, I do think they've been oversimplified. I know people don't necessarily want to give children particularly unpleasant bits of Greek myth, and I get it. But I find it interesting / gloomy how often we're prepared to somehow sort of excuse or overlook or elide violence against women. I don't think it's helpful, and the erasure of women's roles and women having agency in these stories is pretty much de rigueur. It's really hard to find a modern version of a story that's had the same kind of cultural penetration, I think, for a lot of us than the Ray Harryhausen movies, which I love. But I grew up thinking that Jason killed the unsleeping, the Utnos dragon that guards the Golden Fleece, that Jason manages to take out the bronze giant with the help of Hera on a Blackman. And of course it's Medea who does those things. And we know that in Apollonius of Rhodes, we know it in Euripides. And yet I grew up going, yep, that's completely fine. And I would rather other people didn't. But I'm hopeful that there are going to be new editions. I know Jean Menzies has a children's book of Greek myths out, and I'm extremely hopeful. I haven't seen it yet, so I'm very hopeful when I get to read it that she will have done a bit of reclaiming.
And it is an oversimplification, and it's also we get fixed with these ideas. As you said, you became really fixated with this idea of Jason, who we might come to later.
Yes, perhaps.
And as you put it so beautifully in the book, you know, Helen wasn't always an adulterer, Pandora never a villain,
Nope.
and Medusa not always a monster, who we will come to. With this in mind, I wanted to ask you about your trip from the initial idea to this finished copy of the book.
It's a looker, isn't it?
Oh, it's really
I
pretty.
I've
You know,
been
well
very-
done, publisher. It's
Yeah,
beautiful.
I think George is here to talk to us later.
Yes.
But even by the standards of Pan Macmillan, who have made me 3 very, very beautiful books in the last, whatever it is, 3 years? God, that's quick. That can't be right. Is it 3 years?
Don't
No.
think about it.
Oh, okay. Then even by those standards, this one is such a looker. God, she's pretty. I always feel so good boasting about the cover because I had nothing to do with it at all. I just went, yes, it's lovely, thank you very much. That's it. That's all I ever do. So this is all George and her incredible design team who have made it look so beautiful. So a massive thank you to them.
Yeah, absolutely. And as George and Edith and I know, the insides match the cover. They really do. So I guess what I want to know is, like, when did you realise that there were these very different versions, these very different, you know, women hiding in the shadows?
Oh God, I'm not sure. I guess I was probably a teenager. It would have been when I started doing. I studied Latin from 12, I think, or 11, and Greek from 14. No, you can't have my lunch money. I do kickboxing now. But so I guess I was getting these stories quite early. I was reading Homer at the same time I was reading Virgil for my A levels. No, really, I'm keeping that lunch money. And so, you know, you could see even then that there were, it's like, well, wait, in this version, Aeneas is a big part of the Trojan War, but in this version, he's not really here. And so it's a completely kind of unloaded way of finding that out. It's like, this didn't have an agenda. There's not an Aeneas faction in the way that one might, you know, think of there being other groups of people who are trying to sort of advance interests. And yet, even then, you could just like, well, wait a minute. When I look at this story in Euripides, it's different from in Aeschylus. And then, of course, once I was doing my degree, that was, you know, a huge part of what I was studying and thinking about, particularly with Greek tragedy. And so, yeah, I guess it's not really a surprise that once I kind of came back to classics as a grown-up, as a writer, it didn't take very long before I was like, oh, wait, could I be telling these stories? And you're like, wait, I can't do that. Can I? Wait, maybe I can. Yeah, okay, I'll give it a go. And yeah, so it's just been really lovely. But it's the question that comes up over and over again at events and stuff is, you know, but what's the sort of real version? What's the true version? What's the original version of this myth? Like, there just isn't one. You know, they're being created across the Greek world. There are multiple contradictory versions happening all the time because these characters are super popular. The reason that we can't follow a straight timeline through Helen's life, which encompasses everything that we're told about her, that she goes to Egypt instead of Troy, that she goes to, oh no, that she does this, that she does that. The reason is because she was a massively popular character and her story is being told across Greece. And, you know, that how brilliant is that? She's as contradictory, as complicated as Achilles or Odysseus or anyone else. It's just remarkable.
And
Wonderful.
You sleuth.
Oh man, I love a bit of sleuthing. You know me.
You do. And it makes perfect sense when you say these myths have many timelines, you know, as well as the many timelines across Greece. There's this idea of when they are set originally, when they were told, and then all the iterations afterwards. There's so many versions throughout, you know, millennia for you to find.
Absolutely.
But you also say in your introduction, I really was interested in that these myths are mirrors of us.
Yes. And I'll tell you why I said that, because I think he's watching tonight, because I was incredibly tired after writing this book at quite a pace. And I text a friend of mine quite frequently, and I texted Robert Douglas Fairhurst, the very brilliant professor of English literature at Oxford, and said, I'm so tired, I don't know what to put in the introduction. And he texted back and said, just say myths are a mirror, blah, blah. And I was like, oh God, just literally as you're casually in the middle of doing something else, you've given me the right answer. He's such a sweetheart. And so, yeah, the introduction I owe entirely to Robert. I basically got him to write it for me because I was tired. I wish I could say it was better than that. But no, of course, therefore, it's probably more brilliantly argued than anything else in the book. Sorry, everyone, I've let the side down. But yes, I think it's true that myths, each generation takes these myths and we focus on the bit that shows us ourselves. We can't help it, and perhaps that's a very solipsistic way of approaching the world, but I think it's probably just how storytelling has always worked. And so when I look at the stories of, say, the Trojan War or the story of Medusa, I'm looking at it through, of course, the lens of somebody in the 21st century, someone who's a feminist, someone who's, you know, had an incredibly lucky life up to this point, someone who's writing in, you know, a country with enormous wealth but incredible inequality, and all of those things are part of who I am. And so they're part of what I look for in the story, and I guess that's as it should be. It means that everybody who comes after us will be reappraising our versions of it in exactly the same way that we do that too. So it seems to me like I find it a really beautiful idea that we're on this sort of continuum, and that we come to each story and say, you know, what do you tell me about myself, as well as, you know, what do you reveal about the world that you're set in, the world that you're written in. You know, these stories, especially if you look at something like Greek tragedy and find a story which is in Homer, written in the 8th, 7th century BCE, set in the 12th, 13th BCE, and then it's retold in the 5th century by tragedians, and then it's retold again in the 1st century BC or AD, rather, by Ovid. And so we get these stories coming through us through lens after lens after lens. Who doesn't want to engage in that? Weird people with their lunch money.
I know, I've been thinking about what people in the future would think about your book, but we're not going to talk about that. We'll do that another time.
Yeah, no one knows.
No, yeah.
But how cool would it be if we now cut to somebody in a Star Trek outfit?
I thought you'd like that.
I know, if only I knew somebody who'd got a phaser.
And moving on, let's begin with Medusa.
Yes.
Right, okay. Because she's a mythological figure, because there's many people who are here tonight who are new to classics.
Yep.
And there are many people who are not. And I wanted to start with Medusa. She's a mythological figure that we perhaps all know from popular culture and share some understanding that we'd all accept. She's a monster, that she's got snakes for hair, and that she can turn us to stone with one glance. I think that would be most people's understanding
Yes.
of her. So what did you find when you went back to search for her?
Yeah, Medusa is a really interesting character, which is why she gets to be my next novel.
She's your next novel?
She is my next novel, yeah. As long as I can work out how to make it, then yes, she is the next novel. No, of course I can work out how to make it. I'm not giving the advance back. So yes, I can definitely do that. Medusa is really interesting because she isn't always a monster. She is a Gorgon, and Gorgons to us look monstrous, but I have a slight issue with them being described as monsters, because the earliest versions of Gorgons are Gorgonaea, which are these little Gorgon heads which are round, so just the head, and you see them on, well, Agamemnon has one on his shield in the Iliad, for example. Athene has one on her aegis, her breastplate. You can see them on temples and things like that. So they serve a function which is probably apotropaic. They keep us safe. They ward off the evil eye. I'm wearing an apotropaic necklace now, a talismanic necklace, and that's what Gorgonaea were originally designed to do, probably. And then there's a lot of debate about what the scary thing might be that they're protecting us from. Maybe it's thunder. The word Gorgon has been associated with the words, but we're not quite sure, with the word for thunder. So perhaps they're perhaps protecting us from lightning storms, or perhaps what seems more likely to me is wild animals, because the snakes for hair. When you see the round version of the head, it looks like a lion's mane. People are sleeping in much less secure buildings, and snakes bite and kill in Greek myth, as you know from Eurydice's story. And so I think it's probably fair to say that the Gorgonaea start out, they may look monstrous. They have big tusks, so perhaps they also remind us of boar, which could gore a person. One of them gores Odysseus, doesn't he? He has that big scar on his thigh. I say that like we're friends. It is weird, isn't it? I've got to stop this. So that these monstrous heads protected us. And then what happens, I think, so often with storytelling is that the heads already exist, and the Greeks look for a way to create a monster that sort of matches them. If there are these heads everywhere, then we must need a monstrous body to go with them, and so they create Gorgons, which have wings and various other characteristics. They make a loud noise, which is always described in negative terms, because obviously they're female, and that's what happens when women say things loudly. I'm very grumpy about this, as you know. And I'm somebody who hardly ever shouts unless extremely aggravated. And then I think probably what happens is they realise they need to find a way of explaining why there are so many separated heads. And so the story of Perseus comes along. But Medusa exists, or Gorgons exist before Perseus exists. And the story of Medusa is an incredibly tragic one, which is why I can't resist it for a novel, obviously. Sorry, everyone, you will be crying again. Which is that she has a sexual encounter with Poseidon, which in I think Pindar's version is consensual, and in other versions is dramatically less so. And in some versions, she is raped in the temple of Athene, and Athene punishes her for her transgression of being raped. by giving her this snakish hair. Her great beauty, Ovid tells us, was her beautiful hair and her lovely cheeks, I think. And it's her hair which obviously gets, I mean, I suppose it depends how you feel about snakes, but obviously becomes less beautiful after that. And that's why we think of her as a monster. She is perhaps the earliest example of a woman who suffers a sexual assault and is monstered for it, not metaphorically but literally.
You track Medusa's story through many retellings.
Yes.
And my top tip for everyone who's got this book is to look up the artworks as you're going through.
I know, if only we could have afforded to show them all, it would have been lovely.
They're just beautiful. I know, I've been texting them to you saying, look at this! Look at
I know!
They are
really good, I know!
We've got a long winter ahead of us. This is a really immersive way to read your book.
Maybe we should do this. Maybe we should put links up online so that they're there as well as in the back of the book. That would be a good idea.
So beautiful, because when you're wandering around a museum, you're so overwhelmed. But when you're kind of like thinking so much about, the water jug you're describing, it's so brilliant to see it.
That's a great idea. What a great idea I should have had a few weeks ago. Sorry everyone, I'll be up in a week or two. Sorry.
That's how ideas happen.
I've stolen, it happened.
Genius is
Let's
still.
call the whole thing off.
But the artwork you really want us to consider
Yes.
when what Medusa means to us
Yes.
is the sculpture by the Argentinian artist Luciano Garbati.
Yes.
Why did you decide upon that artwork, and why was it important to you to tell? Why was that piece important for you for telling Medusa's story anew?
Because it was this artwork that made me realise that I was confronting my own prejudices as well as everyone else's, which I obviously should have realised sometime before chapter 4. But, sometimes I'm a little late to the party. I was an embarrassingly long way through 1,000 ships before I realised it was an epic. I'm just saying it. Sometimes I don't notice until I've gone through quite a lot more of it than you would hope. Let's call it part of the process and pretend it's not, because I'm a simpleton in some regards. So during the testimony of Christine Blasey Ford to the US Senate Judiciary Committee, she testified about her experiences of having been sexually assaulted by a man who is now obviously on the Supreme Court in America. And a meme that went around the internet in record speed was the Canova copy of which is in the Met Museum in New York, but the original is in Italy. I think it's in Florence. And it's called Perseus Triumphant. And Perseus, he's white, he's marble, he's beautiful, he's naked. He's holding up Medusa's head, having decapitated her. And this, I've seen that statue, pictures of it, dozens of times. I've seen it in real life many times. And I'd never particularly thought about it as just another Perseus and Medusa head and whatever. And when Christine Blasey Ford was giving her testimony, a gender-switched version of this appeared online as a meme, and it was claimed that it was a sculpture. I think you can now buy a small sculpture of it. I'm not entirely convinced after quite extensive research that it existed as a statue before this point. I think perhaps the statue came afterwards, but anyway, I can't find conclusive evidence either way. But there was a gender-switched version, so it's a naked woman, Medusa. She's beautiful with her hair, her snakes flowing like this, and she's holding up the decapitated head of a young man, of Perseus. And in some versions of the meme, text had been added to it, and so next to her head at the top of the screen it said, "Be thankful, we just want equality," and then next to his head that she's holding it said, "And not payback." And the first time I saw that, I literally gasped. Just a small gasp, because I live on my own, it's not for dramatic effect, but and I thought, that's an extraordinary thing to have done, point the first, and point the second, how on earth is it possible that I'm shocked by this when I have seen that original so many times and never been shocked at all? And I thought that's the answer. It takes a real effort to make me notice that kind of violence, which is just inherent in an art gallery. Again, there's the Cellini sculpture of Perseus and Medusa where he's literally standing on her decapitated body, her bare feet are towards us. It is so upsetting. And I thought, I've looked at that sculpture so often, the Canova, Perseus Triumphant, and I thought it's only triumphant if you think you're him. It's not triumphant if you associate yourself with her. If you think of her as a raped woman, how are we glad that you just decapitated her? Our whole way of approaching Medusa is from the outside in. It's like, how do I avoid getting turned to stone by her? We don't think about who she is as a person, so she gets a novel. That's the rules.
Yeah, and you talk about her life being in the shadows and statues. It's so beautiful.
Yeah, because what could she look at without destroying it?
Are we going to... tonal change. Tonal change is coming now. The book is really funny. Really, really funny.
Honestly, it's funny that I just made it sound.
Yeah. The book is very funny. And I just wondered, you're so far away now in time and respectability from your ears on the stand-up circuit. And I didn't know, are there any other authors who've been nominated for a Perrier Award and been shortlisted for the Women's Prize? I don't think so.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't think so.
I don't think so. And I just wondered, was writing this book a chance, kind of like in between novels, to flex your comic skills? Did you have a favourite? Was there a?
I suppose it was a bit, because I don't know, because Ships has got some pretty funny bits in it,
sure.
But obviously it's so devastating so often that it's sort of gradually kind of pushed everything else out of the way. It's all. I find it really hard to resist a cheap joke. You know me. I find it really, really hard not to include it. And so it was kind of lovely. Mainly the fun of it was being able to do so much research and not have to be inside them. I love writing these stories from the inside out and novels. But after Ships in particular, and certainly after doing Jocasta and then Ships on top of each other, I couldn't do that immediately again. And it's like I don't want to stop. I don't want to leave these women behind, but I need to be outside looking at them like as an interested observer rather than inside them going, what's it like when all the worst things in the world happen to you? I needed a sort of I needed to be able to use my brain but not quite as much of my heart. And so I think what fills in that gap is, here's a joke. I can't help it. I can never help it. George was so tolerant as well. As I was like, come on, this is a great joke. She's like, all right.
But it does, really, really works. I mean, that brilliant joke about how much help Perseus needs from the gods.
He needs a lot of help.
You make that so brilliantly.
Good.
And Les,
I had it up to here with him.
You really have.
I haven't even started the novel yet.
And the greatest transgression in Greek myth is not to kill your children but be over 40.
Yeah, that is true. Yeah, that is
laugh.
Objectively true.
Right, that's enough fun for now.
That's enough. How long was that? 24 seconds. That's plenty.
This is a serious book for classicists. So I want to talk about the Amazons.
All right.
You use a quote that describes them as a bunch of golden-shielded, silver-axed, man-loving, boy-killing women.
Yeah, that's Hellanicus. Yeah, what a great girl gang.
What a great girl gang. These are warrior women. And you make the point these women fascinated the Greeks.
Yes.
So I was wondering, how did we lose sight of them?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And it's really, really hard to come up with an answer, apart from because later societies have been more troubled by the idea of badass fighter women than the Greeks. The Greeks obviously really liked them. They had masses and masses of art. Amazons are the second most popular mythological figures to find painted onto vases after Heracles/Hercules, and of his labours, which obviously mean you get loads of him. I think they're the second most popular of those. I can't remember. I think the first one is the Nemean lion. Obviously, everyone's got shares in the Nemean lion. But these women are incredibly, and there's definitely some perving going on. They are being exoticized for sure, because they're these strange liminal creatures. They're women, but they don't behave like women. They fight, but they wear deviant clothes, trousers. Everyone's very shocked, or leggings. Everyone's very shocked by this, because obviously decent Greek men do not wear trousers. They were effete and foreign. And so Amazons exist in this very strange kind of in-between world where they're always fighting the Greeks. There are 3 big Amazonomichies, battles with Amazons. Heracles, and then Theseus, and then Troy with Achilles and Penthesileia's battle. And so the Amazons get attacked once when Heracles comes to claim Hippolyta's war belt, and then they attack back when they invade Athens to try and get Antiope back from Theseus. And then there's one last fight with the Greeks at Troy. And there's an incredible moment where I think it's Pausanias is pondering this. And he's sort of like, you'd think they'd kind of be sick of the whole fighting thing, because they'd lost the first 2, and yet still they kind of went and fought at Troy. And I think it just seems to me so obvious the answer is they're warriors. That's what warriors do. And again, it's like, well, they lost 2 wars. Why are they still fighting? Why can't they just give up like women should? And it's like, well, the Greeks lose/don't win the Trojan War for 9.5 years, mate. And no one thinks it's weird that they stay there until book 2 of the Iliad, when the idea of going home suddenly comes up. So again, I find myself saying, we're holding these women up to different standards than those we hold men up to, and I'm done with that.
Was it the Victorians?
It's probably the Victorians, isn't it?
I think so.
I mean, usually.
Is it usually the Victorians?
You can usually blame the Victorians. I think it's generally, you get a lot of I mean, a lot of things happen when Christian art becomes such a big thing, and so that's what happens to Pandora, is that she gets merged into Eve, for example. So that's miles before the Victorians, centuries before the Victorians, and she just gets kind of obliterated as the Greek version of Pandora, and she just starts sort of being, oh, bad woman responsible for fall of man. You go, oh great, I feel like I've heard this story somewhere before. But with Amazons, I don't know, I think, yeah, it's just an awful lot. Sometimes it's just bad luck. We've lost the Aethiopis, which is the big epic poem that told the story of Penthesilea at Troy, but we still have Quintus Mannaeus' Fall of Troy. We've got loads of it, and yeah, it's not very often taught or read. So, you know, luckily I've read Quintus Mannaeus' Fall of Troy, so you don't have to. I've just picked out the best bits for you. Brackets, they're all the ones with the girls in. You're welcome.
But it's not just the Amazons, is it? You know, I wanted to ask about Penelope, you know, who we've become to know really for her weaving.
Yes.
And the same a bit with Eurydice.
Yes. Is
that we really know her in relationship to some bloke who can't walk in a straight line.
That's absolutely right.
So, you know, why have we got Penelope and Eurydice? Why do we only know them through our understanding of their relationship with their men? Well,
they're two very, very different. They have two very different sets of stories. Penelope is one of our earliest characters because she appears in the Odyssey, Homer, and we get an extremely opaque version of her. Literally, the first thing that we see Penelope do in the Odyssey is veil her face. You're like, oh, now how am I supposed to work out who you are? And it's not an accident that she's opaque to us and enigmatic in the Odyssey. That's a deliberate creation of Homer. He wants us to have to try and guess who she is, but it's a great source of delight to me that we're always presented with Penelope as that she's the perfect wife, and particularly in a comparison that Agamemnon makes with his own wife Clytemnestra. He is, in fairness to him, and that pains me to say, making this comparison from the grave where he has descended, having been killed by his wife Clytemnestra, but she's always presented as the perfect wife by men who don't really know her. Agamemnon can have met her at most once 20 years earlier, and yet, you know, oh, she's the perfect wife. So a perfect wife is a woman you don't know who looks after your kid while you're off, let's say, having a dalliance with Calypso, and said, okay. So Penelope has been, she was opaque for a really long time. Ovid gives her a fantastic letter, and it's the first of the Heroides, a letter to Ulysses. Odysseus is his Greek name, of course, and that's just an incredibly brilliant, you know, an internal version of her, and that, you know, you can see that echoed right the way through to Margaret Atwood's Penelopead, for example, which is just fantastic, very short novella really, which gives us a real kind of access into her head. Eurydice is a really late addition to Greek myth. We don't have any reference to Orpheus before the 5th century, so that's quite late. At least I don't think he's there before the 5th century. He's not in Homer, he's not in Hesiod. And Eurydice's name comes in. Our earliest reference to the story is in Euripides' Alcestis. Then, so we find a little bit out then, but we don't get her name. We don't get her name for another 200 years or so. 300 years even, maybe. So she's just very late. Eurydice is a late addition, but Orpheus is a late addition. So he's the chancer around here, not her.
We're getting very, very close to questions.
No way! Questions!
We are. And I think if you'd like to put your questions in the box on Zerucci or in Zoom, and so I can see them. A lot of love for your Medusa story.
Good.
Natalie.
I need love. I'm very needy. It's the comedian in me.
Those Christians. Someone's even got a tattoo for Penthesilea. Oh, book next year to join a Medea tattoo.
Nice.
There we go. So, Dickon, have we got questions coming in for Natalie, or will I find them?
You find them on there.
Ooh.
Not quite.
This is going to be exciting.
We actually have got a question.
We've got a questioner. Even more exciting.
Oh, sorry. I thought there was someone up there. I don't see any questions up there at the moment, Dickon. But that's okay. I have got another question for you.
You could ask me a question.
I can ask you.
Or you could just ask Dickon questions about where everyone's gone.
I can see all the comments, but they're not questions. But if you would like to put your questions in the box, in the chat box, then I can see them. Okay, right. We've got a question from Sam for you. Natalie, myself and my students always remark on how most mythological monsters are female.
Yes.
Why do you think this is?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because often what we might see as a monster when it's male is sort of a hybrid creature, like a satyr or a centaur, Whereas when it's sort of a hybrid creature but female, like Scylla, I guess, we kind of go, oh, monster. And so I think that's partly the way we categorise them. And it always sort of vaguely bothers me, you know, I mean, satyrs are sort of always presented as a counter to nymphs or naiads or dryads or whatever, and they're obviously sexually very predatory, satyrs. And although now we think of the word nymph suggesting that they too are sexually enthusiastic, let's say, they're generally to be found fleeing predatory satyr, and occasionally turning into a tree or something in order to avoid it. And even then, he's making a go for a twig. So, you know, I know. You don't have to give me that face. I absolutely agree with you. And so I think it's partly a question of how we categorise them. But it's certainly the case that if you look at Greek myth, I think there's a tendency to literally monster women and to say, you know, and I do feel like I let them down a bit, because I was going to do in Ships, I was going to do Odysseus' story from the perspectives of all the women, and that would have had loads of monsters, and then in the end I didn't do it. I just told them all from Penelope's perspective because I liked her so much. So I could have made my defence for Scylla and indeed for Charybdis, and I didn't do it. So yeah, no, I think it's a really good point, and yeah, I wish I knew what the answer was, except women are scary, is the attitude of altogether too many men of the past and occasionally of the present.
They're people too, that's what I've learned.
Definitely they won't be happening in the future.
No, definitely, we know that.
Yeah.
Question from Simon.
Yes.
Savage. Hello, Simon.
Oh, Simon Savage.
How does your non-fiction inform your fiction and vice versa?
Yeah, I hope that they act as sort of companion pieces for each other, if you want to read them in those terms, I think. My vague feeling when I was writing this book was that people had asked me so many questions about the women of Ships that it would be really nice to be able to do a sort of non-fiction guide to reading it, and it's like, well, here are these women, and here's where I stole their stories from, and here are loads of other stories that I didn't take, and blah blah blah, and obviously I also wanted to include loads of other women. So there are, I think, 4 women who appear in Ships to varying degrees in this book, but obviously I wanted to tell the stories of Pandora and Medusa and Medea and Eurydice, and you know, I wanted to do those too. So yeah, I hope that they talk to each other, but I think it should be okay to read them in isolation. I always feel kind of bad when people say, oh, you know, I tried to read 1,000 Ships, but I had to keep turning back to the character descriptions at the beginning, and I was like, oh, I needed to do a bit better. But that would, to be fair, I have to front up about this. My publisher said, you're going to have a list of characters at the start, and I said, no one will need it, don't be silly. And they went, really? And I went, oh, all right. And I was so grudging about it, and I wrote it with enormous ill grace, which you can definitely see when you read it, and I've literally lost count of the number of people who said it got them through the book, so I was just completely wrong. They were completely right. I'm mea culpaing it. That's just true.
Thank you. Great question from Robert, who I think you gave a shout out to earlier.
Yes.
And the question is brilliant. Why Pandora's jar?
Well, Pandora's jar because Pandora doesn't have a box, and it seemed to me the perfect... What? I don't know how to break this to you, but that's why I called it this. Yeah, it seemed to me the perfect way of making people kind of stumble over it when they saw it or read it somewhere, that they'd be like, Pandora's, what now? Yeah, she's got. I think you'll find, Ms. Haynes, that she doesn't have a box until the 16th century when Erasmus mistranslates her, or 1600s. I'm rubbish at this. Modern history is absolutely hopeless to me. As soon as we turn 0, to be honest, it's all game over. But I wish that wasn't true. But as you know, there was a brief moment last year when I didn't know which century it was, so I literally can't be trusted with modern time. And yes, by modern I mean any time after the Romans left Britain. Sorry about that. So Erasmus mistranslates the word pithos in Greek. He's translating Hesiod, I think, into Latin, and he takes the word pithos in Greek, which is a jar, and you know what jars look like because you've seen them in museums. They're really, really narrow at the base, and they widen out, and they've got loads of cracks on them because they're really, really hard to keep whole. And then they've been repaired, and then they're strung up and kept safe. They're not a reliable receptacle for all the world's evils, is what I'm saying to you. And Erasmus translates this into the word pixis, which means box, and it's so quick. Within 30 years, there are paintings of Pandora from, for want of a better phrase, modern time, but before Erasmus, when she's shown with a jar. Within 20 or 30 years of him making this translation, she's pretty well only ever shown. There are very few examples of her still with a jar. She's pretty well only shown with a box, and it just looks so much more malevolent, doesn't it? It's like here she is opening this box deliberately to let all the evils out, and then you kind of go back and look at her story, and in the first version that Hesiod tells of her story, she doesn't have any kind of receptacle. In the second version, she has a jar, but it just sort of appears with her. She doesn't deliberately acquire it. In some versions of her story, the jar is full of nice things. In some versions, it's full of bad things. In some versions, she opens the box. In some versions, her husband Epimetheus opens the jar rather, and all of those stories get lost, and it just becomes woman with box full of bad things opens it and ruins it for everybody. And if you look at ancient art, then Pandora is shown in lots of different extraordinary and beautiful kind of ways, always in the act of being created. Always she's shown, because she's our ancestress. We are descendants of Pandora. There are no women before Pandora. Men are descended from Erichthonius, we're descended from Pandora. And she's shown in the act of being kind of sculpted from clay out of the ground. And that's how she's always shown. If you look at modern versions of her, she's always shown with a box, but she just doesn't have the Greek myth at all. And it seems really hard to not read that as a perfect illustration of everything that's wrong with the way that we've treated women in Greek myth. That Pandora was once this incredible, giver of women and change, and this is Zeus's agent of change. He says, Prometheus stole fire, so in exchange you also have to have Pandora. She's Kalon Kakon, she's beautiful, and also there's another separate issue. Kalon meaning beautiful or fine or good, Kakon meaning ugly or bad, and yet it's always translated as beautiful evil. The good quality becomes visual and the bad quality becomes moral. Honestly, I could have called the book Beautiful Evil and it would have done the exact same thing, because that tells you everything that's wrong with the way translation works. It's like, she can't be one other. So Pandora's Jar, because I wanted people to stumble over it and remember what it was called.
Oh, that's brilliant. Thank you so much, Robert.
I love Robert. Did I
Who
mention
doesn't?
that I love Robert?
Who
Idiots.
doesn't?
Idiots don't. But there aren't any. No one is so foolish as not to love Robert.
That's right. Got a couple of quick questions.
Sorry.
If we can.
Yes.
One is very niche, Scott. Are there any episodes of Columbo that draw upon mythology?
Oh, that is really good. I can't think of any episodes of Columbo that draw upon mythology, but that is really good. Oh God, I'm going to have to think about it.
Don't worry, you can email it. I know
one.
Scott, and you know Scott. You can email him afterwards.
That's all I can think about now.
And a quick help out for Lindsay, who says, I'm new to Greek myths. Any suggestions on where to start in addition to your books, obviously?
Madeline Miller, obviously. Equally obviously. I guess Mary Renault, because she's old school. Bethany Hughes writes brilliant books about, the most recent one is Venus and Aphrodite. I can't remember if it's that way around or the other way around. I'm sorry, Bethany. But it's everything Bethany writes is wonderful, so read that. I really like Zachary Mason. Well, we'll have a token man. I really like Zachary Mason's Lost Books of the Odyssey, but don't read the Metamorphoses, the wheels fall off. But the Lost Books of the Odyssey is wonderful. Emily Wilson's translation of the Odyssey. Daniel Mendelssohn's book about the Odyssey it made me cry and cry and cry. It is just beautiful, about teaching the Odyssey and his dad. And his dad coming along to his classes, and his dad's really old at this time. I can't even talk about it now without starting to tear up. It is beautiful. I can't recommend it enough.
Oh, gorgeous.
Yeah.
I have to edit that bit out and get that out. Okay, this is from Marcus. Hello, Marcus. Is there a story or set of mythical connections that surprised you as you were researching the book?
Yeah, loads of them.
Loads of them,
Loads
right?
of them surprised me. I kept finding myself being wrong-footed over and over again with stories that I thought I knew really well. I mean, there were stories... Clytemnestra, for example, I was pretty convinced I was going to try and tell you about her, having informed my views on her from writing her in Ships. And in Ships, she's pretty terrifying, but she's not unsympathetic, I hope, even though she does some terrible things. And I was like, I'm going to write about Clytemnestra because she deserves to be, she's always presented as this sort of archetypally bad wife, when actually she is an avenging mother. She's taking vengeance for her murdered daughter, and that's how I'm going to perceive her. And I was really near the end of that chapter before I kind of actually sat down and added the bits together and realised that she is in fact avenging 2 murdered children and not 1, and I should have known that sooner, and I just didn't. And there were just countless moments like that where I was like, you're kidding me, I was like, did that really? I was kind of checking the other side, but yeah, it happened to me over and over again.
Oh, actually, there's a question from Alison that I want to ask you, and then we're going to try and get through a couple more before we go to George. Okay. But I think it's really important. And she says, do you ever feel traumatised or re-traumatised by working with these often very violent stories against so many women?
Yes, with Ships I did. Yeah, properly traumatised myself by writing that book, and it took this book to recover. And I told you this when you were reading it and loving it. and you were texting me and saying, I'm really loving this chapter, I've got to get ready to do this thing, and I've just read this chapter. Anyone who is friends with a writer, this is absolutely peak reading work. And go, no one care. We don't care if you've read it. We just care that you tell us roughly every 2 hours that you are reading and you really like it. Honestly, it's all you have to do. You don't even have to open it. Just say, I'm loving chapter 4. That's all we need to hear. That's it. There's not going to be a quiz. Nobody in their right mind goes, which bit? Because you don't need to hear it. It was just so joyous, the whole thing. And I said to you, I think I didn't realise it when I kind of embarked on it. And I certainly didn't sell it to George, on those terms, but I think I was trying to kind of write myself happy again. And yeah, I hope it worked. I think it worked.
Yeah, I think it did work. And
I needed to recover from ships. It was a very harrowing experience.
Yeah, exactly. So that was your self-care, writing another book.
It was. Yeah, you're big on self-care.
Yeah.
Normally it's like have a bath, and I'm like, I don't like bars. Why can't I go kickboxing again? And this time it's like, could you write a book on Greek myth really quickly? Yes, I can.
Here's some cake. I've got you some donuts for afterwards as well.
I can't wait. Love a donut.
I've got a question from Catherine. Nixie. Hello, Catherine.
Oh, Nixie. I love Nixie.
Which ancient women's memoirs, lost and miraculously found for you, would you most like to read?
Oh, Sappho. I think it'd have to be Sappho. I really, really want to know. I just really want to know. But I would obviously also take Aspasia.
Want to know?
Everything. We know nothing about Sappho. And this from somebody who made a 28-minute programme about her for Radio 4. Yeah, we know...
It's a gorgeous programme.
Thanks, but we know almost nothing about her for real. So, yeah, of course, I'd want to know. So we've got so many fragments of her poems, but not whole poems. We don't know how many of them are being written for sort of her persona or for somebody else's. And then with personae, how do you identify? It's just Sappho. God, yes. But also Aspasia, the consort, as she's always described, common law wife, as she's sometimes described of Pericles. So I think that would have been an amazing insight into 5th century Athenian life. And I would... Ooh. I know. Would have been really good. Agrippina, the mother of Nero, as she's so masculinely described. I would just, God, I think she's the great Roman emperor that the Roman Empire never had. Yeah, I know.
Brilliant. Thank you, Catherine.
I love Catherine. I miss you, Catherine.
Yeah. Brilliant book as well.
Yeah, it is a brilliant book. All Catherine's books are brilliant, and also published by George. We've got the same editor.
Amazing.
Yeah, she's got very good taste.
Excellent work, George. Quick one from Olivia. Hello, Olivia. If you had to choose, would you rather be Medusa or Medea?
Medea.
There you go. When do figures like Medusa begin to be referred to as monsters? This is from Matthew. Hello, Matthew. Matthew Sweet. Is it a term from the ancient world, or is it later?
The Latin for monster is monstrum. It just makes me really happy. It's such a good word. It's sort of slightly better than monster, because the gives it the oomph that we're requiring. So yeah, I'm afraid you do get described as monstrous pretty early on, if you are a, monster. And so what was the next bit of his question?
It was, is it a term from an ancient world, or is it later?
Yeah, sorry, it is a term from the ancient world. But, I think that probably the interest in reclaiming the women underlying the monster is a relatively modern phenomenon. So I guess there's not really the incentive to do it sooner. I miss you, Matthew Sweet.
Hello, Matthew. And a couple...
Don't check my book for mistakes, or if you do check it for mistakes, do it before I go on the radio. For God's sake, you've got a couple of weeks. Just don't tell me on air. I can't stand it. I can't see it all happen again.
Is it a loaded question? We've got a question from Alexandra, and she says, what was your favourite creative touch that you used to tell the stories of women in 1,000 Ships?
My favourite creative touch? I guess maybe it was, and obviously I stole it from Ovid, it was being able to write letters, because they don't have writing at that point. Writing doesn't exist at the point when the Trojan War happens, but I kind of gave myself a little latitude because Ovid had done it before me and written the letter from Penelope to Ulysses, and I thought, well, if Ovid can do it, surely I can write letters from Penelope to Odysseus. And I just love doing it. And I don't think I ever quite say, that she's writing letters. I think at one point she says she might as well be scratching she might as well be scratching her message into sand and then seeing it washed away. But I don't think I ever quite, because writing is seen as very dubious in Greek myth. It's very untrustworthy. And so I just love being able to tell the story that way. And yeah, it was just a delight. I love writing letters. I love doing a first-person narrative. And Ships was a joy because it allowed me to kind of keep swapping between them. But yeah, I really enjoyed doing those bits.
Oh, actually, there's a couple of questions that
Although the hardest bit was doing Cassandra and not using anything to do with cinema or theatre, because it's really hard to say she could see this scene playing out in front of her 600 years before theatre exists. Oh, damn it! It was really difficult.
We've got a couple of questions coming on similar lines. One from Shine, I think, and they say Medea and Clytemnestra
Yes.
are such powerful female characters. Would you consider writing fiction about them in the future?
Medea's coming.
Medea's coming.
Medusa next, then Medea after that.
Brilliant. Yeah. And Leanne is also asking about the same question about Persephone.
Ooh, Persephone gets a little chunk of she gets sort of a little tangent of a chapter in this, and I absolutely loved writing about it. And when I was doing it, I couldn't resist it. And when I got to the end of it, I thought, I wonder if I'll come back to you. So I'm certainly not ruling Persephone out, I would say. She's generally, I think you know this already, I write novels because they kind of scratch the that space behind your brain where you're like, what the whole time? Oh God, give it here. I'm worried that Persephone might be taking up a bit of residence. We'll see.
Oh, that's interesting.
I mean, she's a cracker.
I always have this sentence when going around my head that when are you going to give Dido a go?
I love Dido, but I'm slightly. I think we really do occasionally have these conversations. I think Madeline Miller's going to do Dido, which will be wonderful. But therefore, I think it would be foolish for us both to do it. And so, I think probably I'm going to have to let that one slide. Okay,
there are loads more questions coming in. Someone's answered your Columbo question. You'll be glad.
I am glad
to know. Someone's asked Iphigenia or Polyxena.
Yeah, which one?
Yeah, if you'd like to write. Well, it just says both of them.
Oh, they both have such tragic stories in ships. I don't think I can do them again. It was so upsetting doing them the last time. I just don't think I can face it.
Okay, and then one quick one before we go to George, who's very patiently there, I think, and is going to do the toast. And I think it's really lovely because it's someone I think wants to get some help with her masters.
Okay.
And it's Jade.
Don't trust me.
Hello, Jade.
I've only got one of those stick-on ones.
She said, why do you think it's so important to focus on women from myth? Having just started my classical reception masters today, this is perfect.
Great masters. Oh, we'll just stop for a minute and feel really jealous and happy about Jade doing this.
Really
what
jealous.
A great thing to do. It's important because women are half the world. I feel like I say this all the time, but I wouldn't have to keep saying it if people could listen to it in a better way. And by people, I mean people who aren't currently part of my social circle or readers or listeners, because I know you're all already entirely on side with this. But women are half the world. If we don't tell their stories, we don't tell stories, full stop. I'm not so entirely dogmatic about this that I wouldn't be prepared to watch or listen to or read an absolutely extraordinary piece of work that just tells the story of men. If it's as good as Sophocles' Philoctetes, I am here for it. If it's any less good than that, I probably don't need to know any more middle-of-the-road art about men. I probably know everything I need to. Thanks, men. You've had a good go, but honestly, you're not the whole story. I want to know more, and so I bow to nobody in my love for Sophocles' Oedipus Tyrannus because it's an actual proper cast-iron, seen-through-time masterpiece, and at the same time, I don't want to just read that. I also want to read Euripides' Phoinician and find out more about Jocasta. And I don't understand why everyone else doesn't approach a story going, is there some more story I could have? Fantastic. Instead of, I'm perfectly happy with this extremely narrow lens. Why? Why is that enough for you? Try harder. Aim for more. Be Jade, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, be more Jade. Good luck with your masters, Jade. And, I think I said this to you also when we spoke. It's such a theme in your work. Over the last decade, women, they're people too.
Women, they're people too. They're the same thing as people. How many times do I have to keep saying it?
A lot.
Yeah, turns out.
So we're now going to hand over to Natalie's editor,
yes,
George.
Lovely George.
And I hope you've got something to drink to have a toast to get this book launched.
Hello, everybody. Thank you all for coming to join us all celebrating women, myth, Natalie, and all of that over and over and over again, all of which need to be celebrated, but especially today, Natalie. Editing this book has been a blast. working with Natalie has been a blast. I'm enormously lucky to work with clever, intelligent, creative, cross women, which is a tribe I like and indeed love. And I would like you all to raise your glasses to all the women who have not been honoured as Natalie's women have, and who should have been, and who will be in the future, preferably by Ms. Haynes, and hopefully published by us. Hurrah! Congratulations, my love. You've written a brilliant book, and we love you, we love it, and so does Margaret Atwood. What's not to like?
Good day. Thank you, George. I love you too. Woohoo, champagne. Champagne, everyone. This doesn't normally happen at a book launch. It's not even warm. I don't know what to do with it. I'm at a book launch, I've had some crisps, and my wine is cold.
Thank you so much, George. Thank you, both of you, for such an incredible book. So I hope everyone has got something to toast with us at home. As we
I
say,
don't love Diet Coke. It's so weird, isn't it?
Congratulations, Natalie.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Congratulations, George. Congratulations, everyone. See Dan and Andre and everyone there. This salon is now coming to an end. We're going to have a drink with Natalie at home. One should never approach a goddess empty-handed.
That's so they tell me, yeah.
So we've got some champagne for you. And if you've bought the book, if you want to stay on, then Natalie's going to be signing the books live, and we'll do a little dedication.
Yes. Is that what we need?
That's what we will need.
Right.
So thank you so much. That's a wonderful book. Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure to be launching for
Thanks
you.
for having me. Thank you, Helen. Thank you, Dickon. Thank you, Matilda, for doing all the other stuff. George and Edith, thank you for being part of this. It's been so lovely. I really wanted to be in the same room as you all, and it's just been the absolute best thing we could do. I will cry before I finish, so shut up me. But thank you. Thank you, George.
So if you're leaving us, thank you so much. Please come to another salon another time. Otherwise, if you're not, stay around and we'll get your book signed for you. Thank you.